welcome everybody to our webinar. And I'm very happy to have you here for this webinar called Campaigns to Reduce Aviation, a Movement for the Privileged, a webinar to explore inclusiveness and social justice in our communication and action. I must apologize for me being here via phone only, so you cannot see me, but I still hope that it will work well. And I'm very happy to have prepared this, to have the chance to prepare this webinar and to have three great speakers with us today that will explore with us how can we be more inclusive and socially just in our communication and in our actions. So we will have as speakers Tonny, Nowshin, Gabriela, Vega, Téllez, and Sheila Menon with us. And before we start, I would like to give a short overview on our agenda. So we will start with a short introduction by me, saying how it comes that we do this webinar. So what is the reason for this webinar? Then we hear an input by Tonny Nowshin about BIPOC perspective. This means Black, Indigenous, and people of color perspectives in the climate justice movement in Europe. And afterwards, we will hear an input by Gabriela, Vega, Téllez on neo-colonial structures in Mexico through mega projects. And finally, an input by Sheila Menon on how to get towards inclusiveness and social justice in campaigns to reduce aviation. Between those inputs, we will always have a short possibility to ask questions back. And after that, we would like to go into the discussion. So there will be some time for breakout rooms where you can discuss in smaller groups. What did you think about this input? What are your impressions and what thoughts come up? And then go into how can we actually maybe change our communication, or what are ways to be more inclusive in our campaigning. So yes, this is going to be the schedule. And now I would like to give a short intro on why we actually planned this webinar. So the background of this webinar lies in different discussions and also critique we face within our work to reduce aviation. We and also often the general climate justice movement in Europe and the global north tends to be quite white, like dominated by mostly white people. And despite our reach for justice, we're of course not free of racist and neo-colonial structures we reproduce. So as the Grounded Network, we're very happy to have many members in countries of the global south, like for example, our founding member from Mexico, from which we have Gabriela here with us today. But still, most of our member groups are in Europe, and we always need to take care that this doesn't shift our attention too much from the communities in the global south, who are resisting against airport expansions and land grabbing, and who in many cases have already been bearing the consequences of the climate crisis for a long time. So to amplify their voices in our messages and listen to their stories and their solutions should always be a core part of our work. But on the other hand, in our campaigns in Europe, we've faced already also important Europe-specific questions. That means, for example, how can we communicate about the needed changes in our lifestyle in Europe? So, for example, the need to fly less, without being too one-dimensional and putting blame on people who might have family abroad, need to travel, or can't afford taking the train. And the other question is, how can we communicate in a way that people can feel included and empowered to join the movement in our network, even if they won't or can't stop flying today or tomorrow? So in our campaign, Let's Stay Grounded, which was supposed to be launched in mid-April, but was changed now due to Corona, we tried to bring together the systemic and the individual level, but felt that it's also important to think about how can we include different perspectives and realities into our communication. And so even though the campaign won't be launched as planned now, we still might launch it at a later point in a similar way. We think that it's still very important to talk about the questions we're facing within the communication of our campaign now. So also within Europe, it is often the less well-off that are already maybe discriminated minorities who suffer most from environmental problems. And the neighborhoods, for example, with the highest noise pollution from airports are often the ones where already marginalized and discriminated community live. So the question is, how can we direct our communication in a way that also includes people, that is inclusive and doesn't exclude people. So in our webinar today, we will look first at the climate justice movement in general and why in the media it's often so dominated by white people, and why BIPOC people often don't feel comfortable in European climate justice groups. And I'm very happy to have Tonny Nowshin as speaker for this input. And after this, we'll hear an input from Gabriela, Vega, Téllez about the neo-colonial aspects of mega projects in Mexico and what different relation we need to find to nature. And finally, we'll hear an input from Sheila Menon about reducing flight campaigns in Europe. To whom do they speak and to whom should they maybe speak? So now I don't want to go too long with my input, but hand over to Tonny Nowshin, who is a climate justice campaigner and a climate justice activist and a degrowth activist, and also active in the BIPOC climate justice group in Berlin. I'm very happy that you are here with us today, Tonny, and I hand over to you now for your input. Welcome.
Thank you, Anne. I will start using my screen, sharing my screen for you to have a PowerPoint. And as you said, I took my title. I took the webinar title as my presentation title, kind of asking the question and by looking at the climate movement and what it means. So we take this title, and through this we kind of try to explore that. So campaigns to reduce aviation, a movement for the privileged. It was also intentionally kind of intriguing, or at the same time a bit controversial. One could be like a bit provocative, one could tell from the title.
Can you speak a bit louder, please?
Yeah, sure. Is it better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying the title is a bit, as you can see, is a bit provocative. And of course, it was intentionally to create or start some debate around the issue. So why is it to start it from before when we look at the climate movement scenario today? The mainstream groups that are dominating all the media, or we also see that we have been able to mobilize huge numbers of people in the streets. And in last September's climate strike and in November as well, a large number of people came onto the streets, and that was also done mostly with the leading the Fridays for Future group, and then of course Extinction Rebellion. If you look into what are these groups, so Fridays for Future and Fridays for Future website, we see also say they started in 2018 when a 15-year-old girl, Greta Thunberg, started striking outside of the Swedish parliament. And from this, so I would ask everyone to try to look at it from a lens of a different perspective, in a way that in this narration, Is there anything that strikes out to you? Is there something that that stands out, or one could say that I think there's something different? I'd also ask the audience, like, is there something that one of you would want to say when you look at this slide or this description? Okay, I don't know if anybody raised hand. Then, okay, moving on. If nobody has any kind of observation to share. This is also from the next slide is from Extinction Rebellion's.
Sorry, we have one raised hand from Diego.
Yeah, can we have?
I would say that it was too much focused on Greta.
Yeah.
I can expand, but I think it's obvious.
Mm-hmm. And to be honest, it is the case, right? It was this craze that there was one girl who lives in Sweden, and then she started striking in front of the parliament. And this is what sparked this whole worldwide movement, right? And exactly, this is one girl. This is amazing, like how powerful it is, right? Like one 15-year-old girl starting a worldwide movement. Yeah, exactly. And this is also Extinction Rebellion's demands, the Global Extinction Rebellion demand. This is also with this. I don't know if anybody also has any observation to share, or it would be nice if one has something. Otherwise, no.
It is now so small that it's hard to see it.
Okay, sorry. Wait, I was just trying to... Yeah, is it better a bit? No.
Yes.
I mean, for me, when I looked at it, I could tell that for me, knowing my governments, I was feeling that I could tell that it was for countries. It has this inherent global north. One could tell that, of course, it's an international agenda, but there is the people who wrote it are from global north, and the way it engages and the way it talks about climate and ecological emergency. I don't know, from a lens of being a person from global south. When I look at it, I feel that I don't connect it right away. I could tell that it comes from people who are based in global north and who are also engaging the way they could talk about civil disobedience and non-violent direct actions, because from the news, for many of the people, civil disobedience and non-violent actions is not an option. And so when I see this news of 164 environmental activists killed in 2019, that was the case, in 2019. So then I could tell that this is the reality, the way it's divided, and how one young girl could lead to a big worldwide movement is fundamentally based on or was possible due to a structure that allowed it to happen. There were, in India, I heard a story of, here's a noise. It's okay. So there was, in India, there was this girl who started petitioning for even before Greta long ago, in something, I think I read this in the news, but of course that never received as much coverage as much news, and it never could spur a huge worldwide change. So what I was trying to say here is that the way these movements were able to go on and go wide and global is also because where it started and who started it. And that means there is a fundamentally, it is done on this current existing world that we live in, and this world has a world order. And that global world order is, of course, there is this embeddedness. In classical theory, of course, one would say, you're talking again this center and periphery. But this is the case that we see because of how we have a center of the world and we have a periphery of the world. And there is also a reason or a historical reason.
Tonny, sorry to interrupt. Could you try and maybe hold your microphone differently? Because we have this kind of interference right now.
Is it better now?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I was trying to say that the reason why it's possible, and we have this specific world order, and this world order is also a product of years of the world history, if you know. And so then this hierarchy is a result of, and many of you know that already, so I wouldn't go into detail or elaborate on that too much. But this is a cumulative, the colonial history, which is created a certain world order. And then at the same time, what we say often is this is done with the, so this is just to give a short process of what was the process. There was, of course, mineral accumulation. There was slave trade. There was dominance over domestic markets from countries in Europe and the global South. And then it continued through the corporate dominance. Even after the colonization ended, there was shifted terms of trade. In economics, there are specific names for it. This Prebisch-Singer theorem that shows the countries that produce primary goods, for example, agricultural goods or manufacturing goods, when they trade with countries who are producing much advanced, heavy electronic or services or even softwares, they will always lose because the amount of value that is accumulated in each good gets cheaper over the year. And that's how that means the more you trade, the more you lose. And then free capital movement, and all of this was done through a carbon-based economy. And this is the historical emission map for the carbon emission. So we see that there's certain countries that are responsible for the carbon emission. So from this quick snapshot of the history of last 300-400 years of the human civilization or where we are today, one can say what we say as an activist, climate justice activist, that climate crisis is basically a culmination of a colonial exploitation. And then in the movement, when we don't address this enough, so the people who are also active in the climate justice movement, of course, because of the structure, the white activists, we can say the Friends for Future activists, the Extinction Rebellion activists are probably the most privileged activists in the world today. No one, when a person goes to the street here in Europe, they're not afraid that they would die. But in the global South, in countries of South America, in countries in South Asia, people are really defending their homes and they know basically they could die. So dying is not everything, but in a way, it just shows how different the structures are, how different the oppressions are also always carried down towards the countries in global South even more. And so because of that, fundamentally, when we talk about that, that means, so there is a power dynamics in the climate movement that exists. And on the light of that, when we talk about then flying, so this is one data that shows how, based on this whole carbon emission and this historical carbon emission and this whole this structure of hierarchy, flying consists only 2% of the global greenhouse gases. But at the same time, it shows how one person taking a flight back and forth from London to Rome already means they have a bigger carbon footprint than every citizen of these highlighted parts of this world that they emit in 1 year. And on the right side shows, okay, if you then, London-Rome is much smaller flight than London-New York. So then if you take a London-New York flight back and forth, then it's already 986 kilograms of carbon. And that means the highlighted part shows that's already the people of this part of the world emits in 1 year. So what we see in this whole structure on this whole discussion is that so then flying is even more fundamentally a very privileged and is a very luxury at the same time. It's very shifted already even more. So now when we talk about that then, so there is no way we can say that then when we are trying to reduce flying, this cannot be a privileged campaign. But then it really doesn't mean much because regardless, this flying needs to stop or to reduce because of how marginally disproportionate it is. So for that, having that in mind, so then we see we have two kinds of shifts in it. So in there's already a global north, global south, or this whole new colonial perspective within the climate crisis we are facing. And even within the movement, there is this racial hierarchy. And there's also, of course, another layer that Anne said at the beginning, that even in Europe, the people who are often exposed to the oppression from airports are the ones who are poorer. At the same time, often what becomes more face-to-face is like, oh, there are people who work very hard over the year and they want to fly once a year. Why will you take that away from them? So then there is this another layer of put it that flying is just a luxury for very poor people in global north, and why are we even trying to take that away from them? So there are all these different layers that's being put out and tries to make things more complex, but at the core it's actually not so complex. We can really make it simple, and these are the questions I think for the movement we have to address that. If you have the awareness of the privilege, and then this is like how we then build effective global solidarity with that awareness, then how we address this whole argument line of this cultural exchange and freedom of movement that gets thrown at us of this issue. And
Tonny, so sorry to interrupt again. I think people have difficulties hearing you. Is there a possibility you could try to plug and unplug your headset so that maybe it seems there's this kind of...
Yeah. Is it better now or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, then I can also not use.
I think it's much better. So sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry because and then okay, thank you for telling me.
So much better. Thank you.
I could have done it already long ago, like already at the beginning of my. And then the question that comes: There's individual choice. Do we shame individuals, or what does it mean that one person wanting to fly never having flown, or being me, so my home is far away from where I live, and then for me it's not possible for me to not fly because that would be not visiting my family. But that is also this whole dimension is embedded in this whole, at the same time, this whole global hierarchy, but then also of course my class privilege and then my identity. So of course it's at the same time we see it's not very simple, but at the same time we could really cut it down to this point that from my perspective, of course this is open and there's no one answer, but these are the layers that we need to address when we're talking about this movement here. And from that point of view, so then how do we address that and how do we move forward? And for that, I noticed there's this proposal of 13 steps to a just transport system. And if you also have an analysis of these steps that we offer from the lenses of, these lenses that I talk about here. And I think with that, I would like to open the discussion of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tonny, and very sorry for the audio problems we had, but we heard you very well at the end and now.
I'm sorry.
So we have around 5 minutes now for questions of understanding for the next input, and please raise your hands in case you want to speak.
So are there any questions of understanding to Tonny? We will go into a more detailed discussion also later, but maybe for now, if there are any direct questions for her, you can raise them.
Or point of clarification, or yeah, even points where, oh, I don't think that is right what you said.
I see, stay grounded. Lena, you have raised your hand in the chat.
Yes, sorry, I think due to understanding issues, I didn't understand why you said that it's clear that Extinction Rebellion, the text is a Global North movement. I mean, I can imagine it, but I think I missed the point from you.
Yeah, no, I didn't say it's clear. I mean, I said to me, when we talk, so one of the, of course, it talks about nonviolent civil disobedience and pushing our governments to tell the truth and change their actions. So from a Global South perspective, a nonviolent action or having this security, like the way we can use bodies here in Germany or in I don't know, in many countries in Europe, not every, I mean in France police is very brutal, but some countries the way we can use our bodies to put for civil disobedience, it's very absurd in the context of Global South, and that's when I was sharing that how many activists gets killed, and each year in countries of South Asia, because of the governance structure, governance system, the system. It is so when you go on the street, you don't go to the street to protest thinking they might die. So that's the manifestation of, oh, we go in numbers. So why it is not a successful or a strong strategy, yeah, maybe for a mass movement for countries in Global South. That's what I was trying to say. And if you look for maybe cheap uprising, that parts, see that it's a, yeah, it's, nobody wants to read confrontation. Confrontation is so often police are so brutal that it's only a luxury to think that we will be peacefully organized and use our bodies to stop things from happening. Like the way we see illegality here, it's not, I don't think it's possible in other countries in the Global South. That's what I was trying to say. Sorry.
Thanks a lot, Tonny. Are there other questions of understanding or points of clarification? You can either raise your hand in the chat or use the raise hand function or signal it in the chat. Seeing none, I just guess this is a sign that it was a very clear presentation, and I will hand over to Anne for the moderation again.
Yes, thank you very much, Tonny, for your input. I think we will get back on this later again in the longer discussion. Now, as the next speaker, I want to welcome very warmly Gabriela Vega Téllez from the Original Inhabitants and NGOs Eastern State of Mexico Coordination. I'm not trying to say it in Spanish because I'm very bad at Spanish, sorry, but you will do for sure, Gabriela. I'm very happy Gabriela is with us today. She is with her organization together a founding member of the Stay Grounded network and has always been a very important voice for us to connect to Global South struggled and is fighting a very important fight against mega project in Mexico. And Gabriela is going to talk in Spanish, I'm sorry, but she shared her speech with us, so we put it on our slides, so you can at the same time read it in English while she is saying it in Spanish. And in case you're not at the same speed of the slides, you can also download it from a link that Mira will post into the chat right now. And now I'm handing over to Gabriela. Welcome, and I'm very happy you're here with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, I will read mainly in Spanish. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fine. So, en la antigüedad, las sociedades de las primeras grandes civilizaciones como Mesopotamia, Egipto, India, China, el Anáhuac o llamado México y la zona andina generaron expresiones culturales propias, iniciaron el estudio de las ciencias y crearon la distribución del trabajo, sentando con ello las bases de la división de las sociedades en clases sociales, transformando a la sociedad comunitaria en una sociedad esclavista y luego feudal, lo que trajo como consecuencia la discriminación hacia las clases más bajas. Desde la época feudal, ante la necesidad de conquistar nuevos territorios en diversas partes del planeta, se vino despojando a pueblos originarios, sometiéndolos por la fuerza, derivando de ello la explotación de su fuerza de trabajo y bienes naturales. Fue entonces que las clases altas formaron élites que discriminaban a las otras clases que conformaban ese tipo de sociedad. Y con la invasión de territorios más lejanos por las condiciones étnicas como rasgos físicos, color de piel, lengua, cultura, cosmovisión, tradiciones, usos y costumbres, se empezó a generar la discriminación racial. Y fue así que por estatus económico, clase alta, media o baja, o por la raza a la que se pertenecía, se fue generando violencia, que en algunos casos llegó a un grado tal que incluso a ciertas razas no se les llegaba a considerar como humanos. Este sistema feudal con sociedades jerarquizadas, el pago de tributos y el control de la iglesia impidieron por siglos el avance de la ciencia en Europa. Por otro lado, en el continente americano, españoles, portugueses, franceses, ingleses e italianos fueron invadiendo territorios y dividiendo al Sem Anáhuac en extensiones de tierra que luego se convirtieron en países que adoptaron diferentes nacionalismos, idiomas, religiones, etcétera, precisamente por el carácter de los propios invasores. Esto dividió a nuestros pueblos en toda América y se fueron generando gobiernos que impusieron las diferentes formas de explotación, llámese esclavismo, feudalismo y el capitalismo que con leyes a modo y actualmente en su faceta neoliberal está depredando el planeta, profundizando desigualdades y provocando más guerras entre los pueblos del mundo para el arrebato de territorios y su explotación, para la generación de la riqueza que las clases altas acumulan y que les permite comprar voluntades, manipular y abusar de su poder a costa de la vida y de la naturaleza. Nuestras luchas actuales son el reflejo de nuestras luchas pasadas por mejorar las condiciones de vida de nuestros pueblos ante la opresión y el despojo de los que han sido nuestros verdugos, que imponen sus condiciones para mantener viva a la población, aunque sea de manera miserable. Mucho hemos luchado los pueblos por liberarnos de nuestras ataduras, pero los poderosos siempre han contado con traidores que por migajas venden a su pueblo. Los pueblos originarios no somos tomados en cuenta. Siempre hemos sido ignorados por existir una pugna entre los grupos de poder político y económico en el mundo. Seguimos enfrentando la discriminación, la violencia, el despojo y la imposición con el uso de la fuerza a través del ejército, la marina, policías, narcotráfico, crimen organizado y grupos de choque paramilitares, para la expansión de megaproyectos de infraestructura como el corredor interoceánico en el istmo de Tehuantepec, el Tren Maya en la península de Yucatán, el nuevo aeropuerto internacional y el Parque Ecológico Lago de Texcoco en la cuenca del Valle de México, autopistas, refinerías, hidroeléctricas, gasoductos, la renovación y equipamiento tecnológico de puertos marítimos, parques eólicos, granjas de paneles solares, torres de alta tensión, etcétera, para la explotación de la mano de obra de nuestros pueblos en México y Latinoamérica, y el saqueo de nuestra riqueza natural con la extracción minera y del petróleo, la sobreexplotación de los mantos freáticos, la contaminación de ríos, lagos y mares, y la depredación de selvas, bosques, montes y valles, con consecuencias de daño al medio ambiente que difícilmente las futuras generaciones podrán revertir. Otras afectaciones igualmente graves son la violación de las leyes y de nuestros derechos por parte de los propios gobiernos, quienes también actúan como facilitadores al servicio de los empresarios, la suplantación de autoridades tradicionales, la imposición de falsos íconos de identidad regional, las alteraciones a las lenguas maternas y a la memoria histórica de los pueblos, y el otorgamiento ilegal de tierras y de cargos públicos por corrupción. Existen también factores que han acelerado el sometimiento de los pueblos, como la ciencia, la tecnología, los medios de comunicación, la desinformación, el consumismo, la sobreproducción, etcétera, y el control de la población a través del uso de las armas, las drogas, el alcohol y la prostitución, que generan enfermedades sociales. La globalización, así como los acuerdos y tratados internacionales de libre comercio de las últimas décadas, han sido sin consulta a los pueblos y han acentuado la discriminación racial, la división entre clases sociales, el sometimiento de los pueblos, la explotación de los territorios, el terror, la violencia, la confrontación intercomunitaria y el desplazamiento forzado, como parte de los mecanismos utilizados por empresarios y gobiernos para el despojo de la tierra y la imposición de proyectos relacionados con actividades inducidas que, como la aviación, ponen en riesgo a la humanidad y al planeta. For us, climate justice means respect for nature to preserve life. De ahí que como CEPOEM, como coordinadora de pueblos y organizaciones del oriente del Estado de México en defensa de la tierra, el agua y su cultura, hemos procurado vincularnos con las luchas de resistencia en contra de los megaproyectos que afectan nuestros territorios y participar en espacios organizativos como la red internacional Stay Grounded, lo que ha permitido contar con información confiable, establecer comunicación con movimientos alrededor del mundo y hacer visible las graves afectaciones provocadas por la aviación en México, así como la imposición de los proyectos industriales, urbanísticos y turísticos, disfrazados de sustentables, verdes o de restauración ambiental, como el nuevo aeropuerto internacional de la Ciudad de México y el supuesto Parque Ecológico Lago de Texcoco, que en conjunto vienen a ser el tan anhelado negocio de los grupos de poder político y económico de la derecha del PRI y PAN, Hub, Aeropuerto, Nuevo Aeropuerto y Aerotrópolis. Solo que ahora en partes, en diferentes nombres y en manos de los grupos de poder político y económico de una supuesta izquierda representada por Morena, pero que de igual forma afectarán negativamente y para siempre la vida en toda la cuenca del Valle de México. It is clear that despite our realities and particularities being different, collectively we have made progress, and that criticism made against the state-grounded international network work and of its members come mainly from the power structures, companies, and governments that, as in Mexico, have used aviation to do business and loot territories. But following the Zapatista example from our latitudes, in our times, our ways, and with our people, we invite you to continue generating autonomy spaces to replace those power structures, generating other types of fairer societies, and eradicating the capitalist neoliberal exploitation system, which we accuse as responsible for so much destruction and death, and the damage that is being caused to humanity and the planet. We want to point out that while night trains in Europe are an option, in Mexico, the Mayan train means the death of very high environmental value ecosystems, and that the interoceanic corridor and the New Mexico City International Airport are part of the infrastructure that the United States of America has always wanted to shorten transport time of goods and being able to plunder all Latin America. Also, that in spite of the fact that Mexico faces today the highest peak of the pandemic due to COVID-19, the saturation of hospitals, and the lack of supplies of protection, on April 23rd, 2020, the President of Mexico decreed the continuity of the mega project's works. Information is the means to raise awareness and allow Native people to freely make better decisions. However, many do not yet have internet access, so printed information is required. We are also part of the National Indigenous Congress. We will continue our struggle against aviation and the New Mexico City International Airport, as well as this false ecological park in the Texcoco Lake zone in the territory of the Valley of Mexico. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, for this input. And thank you for being here with us, even though you're in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic peak. Are there any questions of understanding? We will later on discuss all the inputs together in the discussion, but for now there's time for questions of understanding. If you have any questions, please raise your hand or signal in the chat.
Okay, if there are no direct questions of understanding, I think we can get back to Gabriela also later in the general discussion. Thank you very much also for me, Gabriela. I think it's really important to have this perspective and to we already see that there are so many different perspectives on also questions of different transport alternatives, like night trains or like big train projects. And I'm very happy for your input, Gabriela.
Thanks.
Now for our last input, we continue with Sheila Menon, and I'm very happy to have her here. We now heard a more general perspective by Tonny on the climate justice movement and how it's perceived and how parts of its communication might be not that inclusive or quite Eurocentric at some points. And we heard an input from Gabriela about the situation in Mexico and how neocolonial structures also continue within the climate politics, the so-called climate politics of the global north. And now with Sheila, we continue to go more specific into how do we actually talk about aviation in our campaigning, in our communication about reducing aviation? What are maybe partly problems in it, and what can be solutions or ways to include a more or less discriminating communication? So Sheila is a social justice activist and has been active with Plain Stupid and Heathrow 13 in UK. And I'm very happy to have you here, Sheila. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Hold on, I'm just realizing that I've got an echo. Okay, so yeah, basically, as Anna said, I've been working in the UK grassroots climate movement, or involved since about 2013, and in 2015 I took part in an action to stop the government approving a new runway at what is already the UK's largest carbon emitter, and a year later I found myself organising a kind of more family-friendly action at the same airport, but increasingly mindful, especially after Paris, the talks in Paris, increasingly mindful of the need to incorporate global South voices in the strategizing and the planning. And so I approached a group called Wretched of the Earth, which before we started any planning, to ask if they wanted to be involved. Now, Wretched of the Earth is a London-based group named after the famous Frantz Fanon book about the history of colonialism and racism and the impacts. And the individuals in that group represent different global South solidarity groups and networks. And they came together around the time of the COP21 climate march in London. And during the planning phase were promised a place at the front of the march. But when they turned up, I'm just going to share this for those who, another participant is sharing a screen, but yeah, I just want to share this photo. Where is it? Here we go. So, share this. Okay, so that's us. That's us at the climate march, and here, so that's us on the runway, and this is the banner that they turned up with at the climate march, and they were told that this is the wrong message for the front, and were physically pushed to one side to make way for a more friendly, colourful, animal puppets with a positive, shiny, happy message about saving ecology. They were zebras and giraffes and things like that. So these clearly felt like the right people. If we wanted to be including global South voices and we wanted to be tackling the right kind of subject, this felt like the right people to be talking to. But how, when I approached them, how it was received was, well, why do these environmentalists always tell us what issue to be campaigning on? And what we hadn't realised was that this request to take action at an airport at Heathrow in London, opposing a new runway and calling for a reduction in flights, what we hadn't realised is that this request would put them all in a compromising position, because flying was the only way that they could stay connected to their families. So this was a stark wake-up call for me, because I realised this also affected me as a British Asian. And I realised that we needed to get smarter if we wanted to truly include absent voices in our thinking. So you see, we thought we were being good allies by approaching this group right at the start, and we weren't realising that our journey had already started without them, from a place that was rooted in white middle-class privilege, in choosing where to take action, how to take action, and what all the messaging was going to be. So we accepted we got it wrong, and we vowed to do it better next time. As an aviation degrowth campaigner, I absolutely see the need to drastically reduce the number of planes in the skies, and risked going to prison for that cause. And with the ever-increasing sense of urgency, I can totally see the rationale for calling to an end to flying. And this is definitely a line that I'm hearing, like lots of people are wanting to call for an end to flying. But the reasons for flying are many. And people's relationship to flying can be incredibly complex, especially when you look at a global north or Eurocentric context. For example, some people, perhaps fleeing persecution, flying might be the only way to find safety. For some people, and I'm specifically referring to Indigenous peoples and people of colour and of global majority, who have been forced to migrate, or who have done so due to centuries of oppressive colonialism, long-haul flights might be the only way to stay connected with their cultural heritages and their families, if and when they can even afford to go back home. It's a privilege afforded to those who can choose to do so by land travel, to stay connected with their families by land travel, especially when it doesn't involve leaving the country. For some people, being so far away from home wasn't a straightforward choice. For many global South immigrants, hearing white environmentalists telling you that you shouldn't fly to visit your family can feel like another form of neo-colonial racist oppression. It does nothing to foster bridges between movements or address the much needed decoloniality of the environmental movement. But it's not just an issue of racial injustice. For some people, flying is necessary due to health reasons or to receive medical treatment. So another example is like trans people, transgender people who face repression in their own countries and have no access to medical treatment at home. And so flying might be the only way that they're able to travel long distances to be able to find that. For some people who are already challenged by society due to physical disabilities, flying might be the only accessible way to travel long distances with any kind of dignity. So like traveling on trains and buses actually can be pretty inhibiting and challenging if you have physical disabilities, and the distances are a lot longer, they take a lot longer. Hearing an able-bodied person or cisgendered environmentalist telling you that you shouldn't want to fly could feel like yet another form of systemic oppression. And it's also an issue about class and economic justice. So we all know that we're operating in a capitalist system, and that capitalist system amplifies our needs and our wants. It tells us what to spend our hard-earned cash on. And it sets the benchmark for what and the social indicators for that kind of tell us what success looks like. We're told that being able to afford a holiday on a hot beach somewhere far away, maybe even tropical or exotic, means you're not struggling financially. So for people on low incomes who are struggling financially, and again, I'm talking about the minority of the people in the globe who are able to fly. Like, we're still talking about a tiny percentage, but within that European global north context, for people on low incomes who are struggling financially, the social and psychological importance that you place on that one flight, maybe in a year, is going to be much higher than someone who knows they can choose to do it whenever they want without too much thought. Even if you were traveling somewhere closer that could be reached by train, you probably aren't going to be able to take the extra time off work that it might take to travel by train, or have the finances to afford to travel by train, because as many of you will know, traveling by train in Europe is really expensive. So in the face of these hard, deep roots of capitalist pressures, hearing middle-class environmentalists telling you that you shouldn't want that holiday or you shouldn't want that flight can be received as yet another form of economic injustice and systemic oppression. So how can we campaign for aviation degrowth in a way that doesn't further marginalised people, further the oppression of marginalised people like this, and replicating systemic oppressions? Well, science is telling us that there is a greater, like the sense of urgency is greater. The impacts are hitting us harder and faster. Limiting global temperature increase to just 1.5 degrees, as was agreed in Paris 5 years ago, is impossible to achieve. And limiting it to even 2 degrees is near impossible. So I can understand why to some people it seems really logical to call for an end to aviation. And the failure of our governments and the industries to listen or take responsibility fuels our rage. And it may make it feel like focusing our attention on consumers is the only way to go. But in our passionate rage, it's really important that we don't just go and preach messages without thinking about how it's received by people not like us. On the grounds of equity, and I say equity, not equality, because equity obviously takes into consideration the reparations around the systemic inequalities. I feel really strongly that any strategy and any solution has to incorporate the nuances and complex layers of deep social and economic injustices and inequality. And we need to frame the issues of aviation around these inequalities and injustices. And not just like mention it on the side, but frame it and talk about it and acknowledge it front and center. So and doing this rather than trying to implement one simple brushstroke on the surface that impacts different people differently and inevitably replicates deep systemic oppressions. So I know that there are various pledge-based campaigns that have been started in Europe over the last couple of years, and are asking people to pledge to be flight-free for a year or for a period of time. And I took a look at the UK campaign, the website of the UK campaign, and it's really easy to read website, really informative about the consequences of flying. And you can see that the people who are involved in running the campaign are very proud to say how they've sacrificed flying, and instead of flying to meet their families are traveling by train. But nowhere on the website does it even mention that social, economic and racial privilege makes it a lot easier to make such a pledge. It's far easier to give up something that you've always had access to than it is if it's something you struggle to access in the first place. So for someone who isn't able to make that pledge for legitimate reasons, how that message is communicated on the website is going to be received with a strong sense of exclusion or self-righteous judgment, like, well, you know, this I can't participate in this, and all the messaging is like, it, you know, like it's a good thing to do. Like we need, these are all the reasons why. It's a compelling reason why we need to not fly. This is the righteous thing to do. This is the right decision, and I can't make that decision because I've got really legitimate reasons for needing to fly. So how that messaging is received, like, is instantly exclusive and is instantly like received as being replicating sort of systemic oppressions that are out there. And someone talked about Extinction Rebellion earlier on. So I think this is the same kind of white middle class, global North and Western European framing that we've seen in the communication of groups like Extinction Rebellion, urging people to take action and be willing to get arrested and go to prison without any acknowledgement, front and center, of how that action might impact different people differently, and what kind of privileges are required to be able to make that kind of a pledge. And I've had this kind of discussion quite a lot, and I've heard people say, but it's impossible to communicate this in a way that doesn't exclude. Like, how do we do that? That's just too complicated. But for me, it's actually quite simple. I think it's simple, but it's bold, and it just needs messaging that is rooted in anti-oppression thinking. So, for example, with the pledge-based campaigns, it could say something front and center, like the opening gambit of the website could be that we recognize we live in a world with deep inequality and economic, social, and racial injustice. And we acknowledge that it takes a great degree of privilege to fly, and that there are many reasons people might fly, and some of them quite legitimate, and some of them in direct response to these inequalities. So we are calling upon those who have that privilege to choose not to fly, who have that privilege to choose to fly, and inviting you to pledge not to fly. And so just something like this, something like messaging. I mean, this is just, a thought that I had, like words to that effect, but something like that instantly communicates that we've thought about the inequalities in society, and we've thought about the fact that this doesn't apply to everybody equally. And even then, if I'm not able to make that pledge, that judgment, that value judgment isn't there because the acknowledgement has already been made. And as I said before, it's really important that this kind of messaging is like front and center and not hidden at the bottom of the page, or on a oh, there are other things you can do page. I think it's really important that this framing is rooted, like as I said before, in anti-oppression thinking. I guess, what else do I want to say? I guess, these pledges are obviously like targeting the consumer end. And personally, I have to say that I think, in spite of, and possibly as a response to, the government's failure to act and the industry's failure to respond, I still believe that the main pressure should be on the governments and the industry, because that's who the real culprits are. Like, that's where the political will is, and that's where the industry is able to continue to operate with complete support for their industry. And we can see that just recently in the bailouts that the aviation industry is receiving from governments. So it is important to pressure governments to disincentivize expansion of the aviation industry, and to disincentivize the growth in flight numbers, to implement legal limits on the growth or the flight numbers, or to maybe impose taxes on the industry directly relating to levels of ecological damage being caused by emissions. And we can see this has already happened in the car industry, where cars, certainly in the UK, where cars with greater emissions, that are producing greater emissions, are being taxed, fall into a different kind of car taxing bracket. So it's already happening within the car industry. We could push the government to make it illegal for the industry to reward anyone for frequent flying. So currently, obviously, as we all know, the industry, not only does it not disincentivize people for frequent flying, but it actually rewards them with even more flights and cheaper flights. We can, so it could be that, like, the government could force the industry to disincentivize frequent flying through mechanisms like the frequent flyer levy, which is a levy that, for those that don't know, it's a levy that will tax people for applying increasing tax for taking more flights. So the more you fly, the more tax you pay. Now, I do still believe that there is a place for consumer-based campaigns, even for pledge-based campaigns. But I really believe, I strongly believe, that any pressure on consumers should first and foremost be targeted at the minority of people all over the world whose privileges, whether that's economic, social, racial, whose privileges allow them to fly a lot without repercussion or consequence, and people who still get rewarded for it by the industry for flying a lot. Because even within the UK, for example, we know that like it's only 15% of the population that's taking 75% of the UK flights, and the UK, the population are flying more per head than any other country, so, or almost than any other country. So something like the frequent flyer levy would totally catch all the worst offenders without catching everyone else in the net too. And that way it's something that I can see would be a more like socially just kind of campaign. And I know that there's another one which is about the air miles levy, but again I've thought about that, and actually, well, people in Europe who have come to Europe through centuries of colonialism and need to visit their families, they are the people who are going to need to be taking long haul flights. They are going to take long haul flights, and so I feel like the air miles levy would again penalise people for having migrated due to colonialism. So I that one I think is still potentially problematic. So I guess if we want this movement to be broad and diverse, and we want this movement to speak to everybody, then we do need to take a courageous and hard, reflective and honest look at our own privileges, the privileges that are informing the perspectives of our thinking. And we need patience to listen and learn what the frontline struggles are for people who are not like us, in order to understand their positions when trying to figure out how to reframe the campaign issue, or how to reframe our campaign messaging, and how to reframe our solutions so that we don't unintentionally exclude them. So we need to be able to kind of put ourselves in these positions, and we also need to be able to include these people in the conversation so that we're not guessing what it is like to be in that position. And this is really important, if on understanding the intersectional diversity of the needs and the contexts of different people, and we still choose to ignore them in our messaging because it feels too difficult or it feels too challenging to do so, then what we're really saying is that we are willfully choosing to replicate systemic oppressions. So I really feel that only by committing to doing that reflective work on our own privileges and taking a truly intersectional approach to our thinking, to our campaign messaging that is rooted in anti-oppression thinking, can we truly build a broad and diverse movement that feels empowered for people to rise up, take increased action, and challenging and stopping the real systemic causes of climate change.
Thank you very much, Sheila, for giving this inspiring examples of how campaigning for degrowth of aviation could work without reproducing systemic oppression. Thanks a lot. I think there were some good ideas and food for thought. Before we go into discussion, are there any questions of understanding to Sheila's input? Please raise your hand or signal in the chat. So far, I see no hands raised.
I realised I had you on mute. Was it all audible?
I heard you well, at least.
Yeah, it was really good. Maybe we can, if there are no direct questions, we would go into breakout rooms because I think the inputs now probably gave us a lot of food for thoughts, and maybe it's difficult in a big group to reflect on this, but at least for me, I can say there are lots of things coming up in my mind I would like to discuss or reflect on. And so we would like to go into small groups now and to have some space to talk with the others about how did the inputs, like all three of them, resonate with you, and where do you see aspects in your own campaigns or your own political activism that could be exclusive or even discriminating? And what are your ideas to change it? And you don't need to answer all of the questions right away, but it would be great to share some thoughts with the others on what resonated with you in those inputs. What do you feel you could reflect maybe from your own political activism? And so we will have around 5 to 10 minutes for this, and then get back to the main room and bring together the points of discussion, and then go into a more deep discussion that can also result in another round of questions to our speakers. Yes, thank you for taking the time to discuss. I hope you had some good discussions, and I would really like to hear some of the thoughts that came up. So this could be now general thoughts that you just want to share with everybody, or also questions that came up during the discussion that you want to pose to everyone, or also specifically to one of our speakers, of course. So are there any questions or thoughts that you want to share from the breakout rooms or also from before?
Please raise your hand or signal it in the chat. I see Lena has raised her hand, and also Poul and Tove.
The others can go ahead.
Tove, I'll take you first.
Okay, I'm for the flight tax, so that's tax issue. So we should tax the CO emissions more and not talk about so much on details, but tax then affects those who fly more, kind of more, and those who don't fly at all, they don't have to pay the tax at all. So that's the more fair kind of attitude.
Thank you, Tove. Paul?
Yeah, and I'm in the same line as Tove, because I think we better link up with the whole climate, case where emissions, CO2 equivalents in tons should rather be taxed, and so that the communities, the societies can relate to, okay, aviation is one of the most climate harmful things you can do, and if taxation is made on CO2 emissions, and I am thinking about a high taxation, at least 200 euro or dollars for 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. Really, that it would give a clear picture that aviation, compared to other activities, is more harmful, and you may choose to take it away, and you may choose to consider what other activities you do to the climate which are harmful or less harmful.
Okay, thank you. 2 arguments for taxes. Lena?
Well, I want to thank you all for those very interesting inputs before, and I think there were some new points, but also some things we've been discussing a lot, also inside Stay Grounded. And one thing we've spent a lot of time thinking about was this pledge part, because since we wanted to start a pledge campaign European-wide, in order to actually also include those critical a more critical justice messaging, trying to not discriminate against people who might be needing a flight once every 2 years in order to visit their families, for example. And we came up with some ideas, like being able to choose, not only to say I stop flying, but to say, okay, I don't fly for within my country or within my continent or for intercontinental trips, so that it's also possible to say, okay, yeah, I stop flying here where I can get by train, or but I can visit my family still abroad. And then also to include an open pledge. So if these options don't work, you can make an own pledge, and we made some examples. For example, I commit to only fly once a year to visit my family on another continent, or I commit to always use the train or bus if I can afford it instead of a plane. And I think this would be less judgmental than the phrase Sheila said, what should be like right on top of every pledge. But we realized also that it's very hard to, like, no other pledge campaigns wanted to take on such a complicated pledge. They want to be very clear and very one simple sentence, and so all the most implemented pledge campaigns don't acknowledge those complicated structures, which is a real pity. And I'm more and more feeling that that's why we should focus on those structures and on the frequent flyer levy campaign, because this has the justice part at its heart. And it really, that message is, okay, there are so few frequent flyers who heat up the world, and they are the ones who should be responsible also for reducing, and not the ones who fly only rarely.
Okay, thank you, Lena. I now have Laura and then Manuel. Laura, who joins us from the other side of the world, or the other side of the ocean, please go ahead.
Well, we were starting to talk in our breakout about how to work in coalition with other groups of people, particularly people of color or Global South or whatever. And I think that Sheila made a really good point about the timing of that you want to be talking to people as early and as often as possible in terms of what you're trying to, in terms of what your campaigns are and what your statements are and what your websites are and things like that. I mean, one thing we try to be conscious about here is not just like saying, okay, this is what we want to do. Will you do it with us? You know, we want to say, what is it that we're trying to do here, and how can, you know, what do you think we should be doing, and how should we be doing it?
Thanks, Laura. Manuel has withdrawn his hand, but instead Francois has raised his hand. Francois, please go ahead. And then I see Sheila has also raised her hand.
Hello, everybody. No, I just some thoughts, because I could not speak because we didn't have enough time at the breakout. Just to say that I find that, okay, what is made possible with planes, the fact that one can travel for a cheap amount of money on the other side of the has created like a system which is actually which is what it is, like it's the present world. I think we need to transform it on transforming things. Means really that that we have to completely change the way we live, the way we function, and for many people it will be very difficult because their whole life is organized with the present situation. But so I think I don't think it's possible to have to make it completely harmless. Transformation is always a crisis in a way. What is very important is to push as much possible all the solutions so that the poor people are supported as much as possible. And also I wanted to say that people that are traveling by plane, they're still the privilege among mainly the elites, but there's also some let's say privilege among the poor. Like some people are not flying at all. Like still to say that like. One thing is that I really find it so beautiful, like all the care that I see in people to try to be really just and to take care of, to make it really like a just world and so on. And this I find really moving to listen to you. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, Francois. Sheila.
Yeah, I think a question that came up in our breakout group was, how do we reach these people? Like, who are they? How do we include them in the conversation? I think it's a question that I've heard asked many times, and it feels like an instant obstacle, an instant barrier, and it does take work. It does take effort to do the outreach, to meet people. They don't necessarily need to be involved in the organizing if your organizing is unpaid and it requires privilege to do that organizing, but you can use that privilege to then go out and speak to people and research. You know, it takes research before any kind of campaign messaging. You need to research. And so
can you speak a bit louder?
Yeah, sure. Is that better if I hold this closer? Okay. So yeah, I think, you know, it takes, you can use that privilege to go out and do the outreach and do the research. But in terms of like finding those people, you know, like we talk about global South people, and for me that was obviously looking at the kind of racial inequalities of how messaging can be excluding of people from global South families or communities. That was something that was obviously relevant to me, but you know, understanding the position of, say, transgender people who might need to travel across Europe for medical treatment, or for physically disabled people who are you know, with physical disabilities that are not able to get on trains and buses. Like, these are not my perspectives, but it doesn't take much to try and find people for whom you can like understand this perspective. And then for me, in terms of like the messaging, it's just really being able to kind of test your messaging out. So go, like, if I'm that person, how is it going to feel to receive this messaging? If I'm that person that I've spoken to, how is it going to feel to receive this messaging? And really, like, and I think that's why I have to say that I feel like it's anti-oppression thinking. It's the very, that needs to be at the very root of how you communicate, that allows you to sort of just understand that there are, you're not going to know all of the different perspectives. With anti-oppression thinking, you understand that we live in an oppressive system, and we are replicating those oppressions consciously or unconsciously. So we just have to keep doing the work. It doesn't finish. You don't do anti-oppression work and then you've done it. It's a lifelong practice. So you need to just keep on understanding the different perspectives and then communicating from that place of understanding, so that you are acknowledging that there are differences. So like I was saying with the pledge website, if I was to see that there's an acknowledgement that there's differences, then the fact that the pledges are calling for people who have privilege to be able to take those pledges makes it instantly not feel exclusive. Like, it doesn't need to have X exclusions or you know, sort of like different tiers of pledges in the system, which I can understand would get really complicated. So yeah, for me, it's just about like testing the communication out on those different perspectives.
Thanks a lot, Sheila. So encouragement for a lifelong work. And are there, yeah, it's good.
Thank you very much to everybody. Also, maybe just one thought from our group, or that I had also in mind, is that for me it was very insightful again to hear how and realize how different things are for different people and also in different countries, and that once we talk about solution, we must always keep in mind that this is probably not the solution for everybody, and that we should be, on one hand, of course, call for the big transformation for the whole world, but then realize also that probably it needs many different solutions in different countries. And I found Gabriela's example of night trains being a good solution maybe in Europe, but at the same time train projects also harming the environment, which is also the case for Europe, of course, but which is a special threat to the ecosystem, obviously, in Mexico. And so for me, it's very important to have this, this idea in the back of our heads when we're campaigning, that we need a plurality of solutions, and that probably also within our solutions there are always pitfalls, and that it's very good always to hear from each other what are the problems and where lie our different struggles. And this is also what I understood from Gabriela in our breakout rooms, that it is very important to connect and to give each other information, to know about each other's struggles, and that this already helps a lot. And this is something I take also from this webinar. I saw that there was another raised hand.
Yes, I have Lena who raised her hand. Is there anybody who has not yet spoken who would like to say something?
It's just one comment, one correction. And I think it's not really on the ecological problem of the train, which was mentioned by Gabriela, right? It is more about the threatening of the livelihood of the Zapatistas in this region, because it would bring tourism, and it would, I think this is more the problem of it, right, Gabriela?
Well, this point we expressed doesn't mean that our campaigns in Stay Grounded, as a part of Stay Grounded, are not positive. They are very positive, but the only thing we don't express aloud in Mexico is about the trains. That's all. But all the rest, and the arguments, the information, all of these have helped us a lot to defend, to have an important, even legal fundament. So it's very, very important. But at this moment, we are fighting against this train that is destroying a very important part of our territory in Mexico. And that's it. But we participate and we sign, and we are convinced of this kind of work we are doing with all of you. That's all I want to put here.
Thank you.
Thank you for this clarification. So if there are no more comments or discussion points, I would also try to come to an end, since it's already nearly 7 o'clock, and we had a long and very insightful webinar. To summarize a bit, again, we heard in the beginning about the general aspects of climate justice and also some problematic approaches of climate justice movement in Europe. Then we heard some insightful thoughts and information about the situation in Mexico, and in the end a very intensive talk by Sheila about how to incorporate intersectional justice into our communication. And I want to thank you very, very much to all of our speakers for your input. And I think it's good to take away that we're never finished with this discussion, that it needs to go on. And what I heard from the discussion now in the end is that we need to look out for the people we want to include in our communications. We need to approach people that are maybe not within our bubble or within our usual reach, and ask them if our messaging is inclusive or exclusive for them, and try to integrate their opinions. And this is a very important task for us, and that we keep in mind that aviation is a topic that applies very differently to different people, and that probably there is no easy solution for campaigning on reducing aviation, and and how we include also the individual lifestyle that many of us have in Europe in this. But I see webinars like this and input like yours as first step towards more reflection on this, and I hope we can all take something home with us from this. So thank you very much again also for attending. And as always, we would really be happy if you can fill in our feedback form from the webinar. And Mira just posted it in the chat, so it would be great if you click on the link and open it already now, because it will vanish once we finish this webinar. And as always, we will also write a blog post about the webinar and put it online on our website. So in case you have any friends or people that you think, or colleagues, people that you think that could be interested in this, feel free to share it. And now I wish all of you a very nice evening or morning, day, if you're on the other side of the world. And thank you very much for attending.